Late at night, I was cleaning my bedroom when I heard the door creak. Turning around, I saw my 19-year-old adopted son, Jake, staring at me intently. His gaze was not filial but masculine, piercing. My marriage to Tom had long since cooled off, and this attention, it confused me. We both knew it was wrong, but something was pulling us toward each other. What will happen next? Subscribe to find out. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the dusty plains of our small Texas town. I was in my bedroom, elbows deep in a cleaning spree, when I heard the faint creak of the hardwood floor behind me. My hands froze mid-motion, clutching an old leather-bound journal I'd just pulled from the nightstand drawer. I'd been meaning to tidy up the clutter, something to keep my mind off the quiet monotony of life with Tom, but I hadn't expected company. Thinking it was just the house settling, I brushed it off and flipped open the journal, skimming a page of half-forgotten thoughts I'd scribbled years ago. That's when the door creaked again, louder this time, and I spun around. There, leaning against the doorframe, stood Jake, my 19-year-old stepson. His dark hair was tousled from the wind, and his green eyes locked onto me with an intensity that made my stomach flip. He wasn't supposed to be here. Last I knew, he was 2 hours away in Austin, buried in college midterms. "Hey, Emily," he said, his voice low and casual, like he'd just strolled in from the porch instead of catching me off guard in my own space. His gaze flicked from my face to the journal in my hands, and a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "What's that?" I snapped the journal shut, my cheeks burning as I shoved it behind my back. "Nothing special," I stammered, my voice higher than I'd intended. "Just old stuff." The lie felt flimsy even as it left my lips. That journal wasn't just old stuff, it was a relic of a younger me, full of dreams and frustrations I'd buried after marrying Tom. Jake didn't need to know that. He didn't need to know anything about the parts of me I kept hidden, especially not now, with him standing there looking at me like, well, not like a son should. He tilted his head, his smirk widening just enough to make my pulse race. "You sure about that?" he asked, stepping into the room. His boots scuffed lightly against the floor, and suddenly the space felt smaller, the air thicker. I took a step back, bumping into the nightstand, and clutched the journal tighter. "Jake, what are you even doing here?" I said, trying to steer the conversation somewhere safe. "I thought you were in Austin." "Got a break," he shrugged, his eyes never leaving mine. "Thought I'd surprise you." The way he said "you" hung in the air, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. "Not you and Tom. Just me." My throat tightened. Tom was out on the ranch, as usual, tending to the cattle or fixing fences. Anything to avoid the house. We'd been married 10 years, but lately, it felt more like I was his housekeeper than his wife. He barely noticed me anymore, and I'd gotten used to it. Or at least I thought I had. But now, with Jake standing there, watching me like I was the only thing in the room worth seeing, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't in years, something warm and dangerous. "Surprise me?" I forced a laugh, hoping it'd break the tension. "Well, you did that. I was just cleaning up. You caught me at a bad time." I turned to shove the journal back into the drawer, desperate to put some distance between us, but his voice stopped me cold. "You don't have to hide it, you know," he said, softer now, almost gentle. "I'm not gonna judge you." I froze, my hand hovering over the drawer. "It's not about that," I said quickly, glancing over my shoulder. "It's just personal." Personal didn't even begin to cover it. Those pages held pieces of me I didn't share with anyone. Not Tom, not my friends, and certainly not Jake. But the way he was looking at me, steady and unflinching, made me wonder what he saw. Not the tired 38-year-old woman staring back at me in the mirror every morning, that's for sure. His gaze was too sharp, too curious, like he was peeling back layers I'd forgotten were there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of cicadas drifted in through the open window, mixing with the thud of my heartbeat in my ears. I should have told him to leave, to go unpack or call his friends, anything to get him out of my room. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, pinned by his stare, feeling a strange mix of guilt and thrill twist in my chest. You okay? He asked finally, stepping closer. Too close. I could smell the faint hint of his cologne, something woodsy and warm, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I'm fine, I lied, turning away to fuss with a stack of pillows on the bed. Just surprised, like I said. You should have texted. My voice sounded shaky, and I hated it. Jake didn't move, though. I could feel him behind me, his presence filling the room like a storm rolling in. Maybe I wanted to see your face when I showed up, he said, and there it was again, that tone, that look. It wasn't the way a stepson talked to his stepmom. It was something else, something that made my skin prickle and my conscience scream. I whipped around, ready to shut it down, to tell him to stop whatever this was before it started. But when I met his eyes, the words died in my throat. He wasn't smirking anymore. He was just watching me, like he was waiting for something. And for one reckless second, I wondered what would happen if I didn't push him away. The next few days felt like walking on a tightrope. Jake didn't leave after that night in my bedroom. He stayed, settling into the guest room down the hall as if his surprise visit was just a casual drop-in. But nothing about it felt casual. Every time he walked into a room, the air shifted, like a current pulling me under. I tried to ignore it, throwing myself into chores, scrubbing counters, folding laundry, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind off him. But Jake had a way of showing up exactly when I didn't want him to, and worse, I wasn't sure I minded. It started small. He'd linger in the kitchen while I cooked dinner, leaning against the counter with that easy grin of his. Need a hand, Emily? He'd ask, his voice smooth as he reached for a knife to chop vegetables. His fingers brushed mine when I passed him the cutting board, and I'd jerk back like I'd been shocked, muttering something about having it under control. He'd just chuckle, low and quiet, and keep going like nothing happened. But something was happening. I could feel it in the way my pulse jumped, in the way I caught myself watching him when I thought he wasn't looking, his broad shoulders, the way his dark hair fell into his eyes when he bent over a task. It was ridiculous. I was 38, married, his stepmom for crying out loud. And yet, there I was, feeling like a teenager with a crush. Tom didn't help matters. He'd come home late from the ranch, boots caked in mud, his face lined with exhaustion. Long day, he'd grunt, dropping into his recliner with a beer and the TV remote. That was it. No, how was your day, Emily? Or even a glance my way. 10 years ago, he'd pull me into his arms after a hard day, his calloused hands warm against my skin. Now, I was lucky if he noticed I'd made his favorite chili. I didn't resent him. Not exactly. It was easier to let it slide than fight about it, but the emptiness gnawed at me. And Jake noticed everything. You look tired, he said one evening, catching me wiping down the stove after Tom had shuffled off to bed. He doesn't even see how much you do, does he? I froze, rag in hand, my throat tightening. It's fine, I said, turning away to rinse the rag in the sink. Tom works hard. We've got our routine. But Jake stepped closer, his voice dropping. Doesn't mean it's right. You deserve more than a routine. His words hit me like a punch, and for a second I couldn't breathe. I wanted to snap at him, tell him to mind his own business, but the truth in what he said stung too much. I muttered something about needing sleep and bolted upstairs, my heart racing like I'd run a mile. It didn't stop there. The next morning, I found him fixing a loose cabinet door in the kitchen, shirt sleeves rolled up, toolbox at his feet. Thought I'd make myself useful, he said with a shrug when I walked in. I nodded, trying to focus on pouring coffee, but my eyes kept drifting to him, the flex of his arms, the concentration on his face. Thanks, I managed, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. He glanced up, catching me staring, and that damn smirk crept back. Anytime, he said, and the way he held my gaze made my stomach flip. I turned away fast, spilling coffee on the counter in my rush to escape. By the end of the week, it was unbearable. He'd offered to carry groceries from the truck, his hand brushing mine as he took the bags. He'd sit too close on the porch steps when I went out to water the plants, his knee bumping mine like it was nothing. Each touch, each look, chipped away at the wall I was trying to keep between us. And the worst part? I liked it. I liked the way his attention made me feel, seen, alive. like I wasn't just Tom's shadow. It was wrong, so wrong, but the guilt couldn't drown out the thrill. Friday night, Tom was out late again, probably at the bar with his ranch hands. I was in the living room, flipping through a magazine I wasn't reading, when Jake wandered in. He dropped onto the couch beside me, too close, as usual, and stretched out, his arm resting along the backrest behind my head. "Quiet night," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes locked on mine. I nodded, my mouth dry. "Yeah." "Tom's still out." He tilted his head, studying me. "Doesn't it get old? Him leaving you here alone." I swallowed hard, clutching the magazine like a shield. "It's just how it is," I said, but my voice wavered. Jake leaned in, just enough that I could feel the warmth of him, smell that woodsy cologne again. "It doesn't have to be," he murmured. My breath hitched, and I shot to my feet, tossing the magazine on the coffee table. "I need some air," I blurted, heading for the door. He didn't follow, but I felt his eyes on me as I stepped onto the porch, the cool night air doing nothing to calm the heat in my chest. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the dark fields, my mind a mess. This wasn't just a kid with a crush. This was Jake, my stepson, crossing lines I'd never imagined. And me? I was letting it happen. I knew it had to stop, that every glance and touch was pulling us towards something we couldn't come back from. But as I stood there, the truth clawed at me. Part of me didn't want it to stop at all. The storm rolled in on Saturday night, dark clouds swallowing the Texas sky as thunder rumbled in the distance. I'd been restless all day, the tension with Jake coiling tighter inside me like a spring ready to snap. Tom was out again, some emergency with the cattle, he'd said, barely looking at me as he grabbed his keys and left. The house felt too big, too quiet, and I busied myself in the kitchen, wiping counters that didn't need wiping. Anything to keep my hands moving, my thoughts from drifting to the green-eyed trouble down the hall. Then the lights flickered. A crack of lightning split the sky, and the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. I cursed under my breath, fumbling for the flashlight in the junk drawer, when I heard footsteps behind me. "Need help?" Jake's voice cut through the silence, calm and steady, like the storm was just background noise to him. I turned, barely making out his silhouette in the dim glow from the window. "I've got it," I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. But my hands shook as I rummaged through the drawer, and he stepped closer. Too close, his presence filling the space like the thunder outside. "Here," he said, reaching past me to grab the flashlight from the back of the drawer. His arm brushed mine, and I froze, the warmth of him seeping through my skin. He clicked it on, the beam cutting through the dark, but he didn't step back. Instead, he aimed it at the floor, leaving us in a soft halo of light. "You're jumpy tonight," he said, his tone light, but his eyes searching mine. I swallowed hard, clutching the edge of the counter. "It's just the storm," I lied, but we both knew it wasn't true. The air between us crackled, heavier than the humidity pressing in from outside. He set the flashlight down, the beam tilting up to cast shadows across his face, sharp jawline, those piercing eyes. "Emily," he said, quieter now, "you don't have to keep pretending." My heart thudded so loud I was sure he could hear it. "Pretending what?" I whispered, though I knew exactly what he meant. He took a step closer, his boots scuffing the tile. "That you don't feel it too." I should have pushed him away, told him to leave, to stop this before it went too far. But my feet wouldn't move, and my voice caught in my throat. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the room, and in that split second, I saw it. Vulnerability in his eyes, a crack in that confident mask he wore. Then he leaned in, slow enough that I could have stopped him, and kissed me. It was soft at first, hesitant, like he was testing the water. My hands gripped the counter, my mind screaming this is wrong, but my body didn't listen. I kissed him back, a rush of heat flooding through me as I clutched his shirt, pulling him closer. It lasted only a moment before thunder crashed, jolting me back to reality. I shoved him away, my breath ragged, my hands trembling. "We can't," I gasped, stepping back until I hit the sink. Jake didn't move, his chest rising and falling, His eyes locked on mine. "I know," he said, voice low, but there was no regret in it, just certainty, like he'd known this was coming all along. The lights flickered back on, harsh and bright, and I turned away, wrapping my arms around myself as guilt crashed over me like a wave. What had I done? The next morning, I couldn't look at him. He sat at the breakfast table, sipping coffee like nothing had happened, while Tom droned on about the ranch over his eggs. I kept my head down, scrubbing a pan in the sink, but I felt Jake's gaze on me, steady and unreadable. My stomach churned with shame, and something else I didn't want to name. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and the weight of it crushed me. But it wasn't over. As I stepped outside to hang laundry later, I caught a shadow moving across the yard. Linda, our nosy neighbor, stood by her fence, her sharp eyes narrowed as she watched me. She waved, a tight smile on her lips, and called out, "You've been awfully distracted lately, Emily. Everything okay over there?" My heart stopped. I forced a smile, pinning a sheet to the line. "Just busy," I said, but my voice shook. She tilted her head, her gaze flicking toward the house, toward Jake, who just stepped onto the porch with a glass of water. She hummed, that smile still in place. "Well, you know how small towns are. Nothing stays quiet for long." She turned away, leaving me clutching the laundry basket, dread pooling in my gut. Had she seen us last night? The kitchen window faced her yard, open, uncurtained. I felt sick. Jake walked over, casual as ever. "She giving you trouble?" he asked, nodding toward Linda's retreating figure. "No," I snapped, shoving past him. "Just leave it." But as I hurried back inside, I knew it wasn't that simple. Linda's words weren't a question, they were a warning. And whatever this was with Jake, it wasn't just our secret anymore. The days after the kiss were a blur of paranoia and stolen glances. I threw myself into anything that kept me busy, scrubbing floors, weeding the garden, baking bread I didn't even want, just to avoid Jake. But he was everywhere, like a shadow I couldn't shake. He'd offer to help with the dishes, his arm brushing mine as he reached for a plate, or linger on the porch while I watered the plants, his voice low and teasing. "You're avoiding me," he said one afternoon, catching me off guard as I hauled a bag of mulch across the yard. I didn't look up, my hands dirty and trembling. "I'm just busy," I muttered, but the lie tasted bitter. We both knew the truth. Tom was oblivious, at first. He'd come home from the ranch, kick off his boots, and collapse into his routine of beer and silence. But I could feel the shift, a crack in the fragile normalcy I'd clung to. It started with little things. The way he'd pause in the doorway, watching me a beat too long, or how his jaw tightened when Jake walked into the room. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, but Linda's warning echoed in my head. Nothing stays quiet for long. She hadn't said anything else since that day by the fence, but her sharp eyes followed me every time I stepped outside, like a hawk circling prey. Then it all unraveled. It was a Thursday evening, the air thick with the promise of rain. I was in the laundry room, folding towels, when Jake slipped in behind me. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice soft but loaded. I shook my head, keeping my eyes on the stack of linens. "I'm fine," I said, but he didn't leave. He stepped closer, his breath warm against my neck as he reached for a towel, his fingers grazing mine. My heart raced, and I hated how much I wanted him to stay there, close enough to feel. "Jake, stop," I whispered, but it sounded weak, unconvincing. He didn't move, just stood there, the space between us shrinking until I could barely breathe. That's when the front door slammed. "Emily." Tom's voice boomed through the house, sharper than usual. I jolted, shoving Jake back just as Tom appeared in the doorway. His eyes swept over us, me, flushed and clutching a towel, Jake leaning against the dryer, too casual for the tension in the air. "What's going on?" Tom asked, his tone clipped. I forced a smile, my hands shaking. "Just folding laundry," I said too fast. Jake was helping. Tom's gaze lingered, flicking between us, and for a moment, I thought he'd let it go. "Dinner's almost ready," I added, brushing past him to escape. But his silence followed me, heavy and accusing. That night it exploded. Tom cornered Jake in the living room after dinner, his face red and his voice shaking with fury. "I'm not stupid," he snapped, slamming his fist on the coffee table. "I see the way you look at her. What the hell's going on?" Jake stayed calm, arms crossed. "You're imagining things," he said, but Tom wasn't having it. "Don't lie to me," he roared, knocking over a glass that shattered on the floor. I rushed in, panic clawing at my chest. "Tom, stop," I shouted, stepping between them. He turned to me, his eyes blazing. "Tell me the truth, Emily. Is there something between you two?" My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The silence was deafening, and Tom's face crumpled, anger giving way to betrayal. "I knew it," he said, his voice breaking. "How could you?" Tears stung my eyes as I shook my head. "It's not what you think." I lied, but it was too late. "Get out," he growled at Jake, pointing to the door. "Pack your stuff and leave. Tonight." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He glanced at me, searching, pleading, then walked out of the room. I followed him to the driveway, my chest aching as he tossed a duffel bag into his truck. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. He paused, his hand on the door, and looked at me with something raw in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said quietly, then got in and drove off, taillights fading into the dark. I stood there, shivering, until the sound of his engine was gone. The next morning, Linda showed up at my door, her expression cold. "I saw you two that night," she said, her voice low. "In the kitchen. I won't tell Tom, yet. But this stops, Emily, or everyone knows." I nodded, numb, promising her it was done. Inside, Tom barely spoke to me, his silence a wall I couldn't breach. I'd saved us from ruin, but at what cost? The reckoning wasn't over. It was just beginning. The house felt hollow after Jake left. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, every sound echoed louder in his absence. Tom moved through the days like a ghost, his eyes avoiding mine, his words clipped to necessities. "Pass the salt, or I'll be late." The silence between us wasn't new, but now it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Anger, hurt, a fracture too deep to mend with apologies. I'd scrubbed the kitchen spotless, rearranged the pantry, even repainted the porch railing, but nothing erased the guilt gnawing at me. I'd crossed a line, and we were all paying for it. A week later, the mail brought a surprise, a plain envelope with no return address, just my name scrawled in Jake's messy handwriting. My hands trembled as I tore it open, glancing over my shoulder to make sure Tom wasn't around. Inside was a single sheet of paper, his words spilling across it in black ink. "Emily, I'm in Dallas now." I didn't want to leave like that, but I get it, things got messy. I meant what I said, though. This isn't over for me. I don't care what anyone thinks. When you're ready, I'll be here. Always, Jake. I read it twice, my chest tightening with a mix of longing and shame. Part of me wanted to rip it up, burn it, pretend it never came. But instead, I folded it carefully and tucked it into the back of my dresser drawer, a secret I wasn't ready to let go of. Linda kept her word. She didn't tell Tom. But her price was steep. She'd stop by unannounced, her sharp eyes scanning the house like she was waiting for proof I'd broken my promise. "Just checking in," she'd say with that tight smile, sipping coffee I hadn't offered. I'd nod, force a laugh, and assure her everything was fine. "It's over," I told her once, my voice steady despite the lie in my heart. She didn't push, but her presence was a leash, a reminder that my mistakes weren't buried. They were just waiting. Tom and I tried to patch things up, or at least pretend to. One night, he sat me down at the kitchen table, his hands clasped tight. "I don't know what happened," he said, his voice rough, "but I don't want to lose you, Emily." His eyes were tired, pleading, and for the first time in years, I saw the man I'd married, not the distant rancher he'd become. I nodded, tears prickling my eyes. "I don't want to lose you either," I said, and it was true mostly. We agreed to move forward, to try, but as he squeezed my hand, I felt the distance between us, a gap widened by my choices, one we'd never fully close. Weeks turned into months, and life settled into a fragile routine. Tom spent more time at home, making small efforts, fixing the leaky faucet, asking about my day. I smiled, cooked his favorite meals, played the part of the wife I'd promised to be. But late at night, when he snored beside me, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, Jake's letter burning a hole in my thoughts. I didn't write back, didn't call. I told myself it was done, that I'd chosen my life with Tom. But the truth lingered, sharp and unyielding. I missed Jake. Not just the thrill, but the way he'd seen me, really seen me, when I'd felt invisible for so long. One afternoon, I was pulling weeds in the garden when Linda waved from her yard. "You're looking better," she called, her tone lighter than usual. I straightened, wiping dirt from my hands. "Thanks," I said, managing a smile. "Things are steady." She nodded, satisfied, and walked away. I watched her go, then sank onto the porch steps, the weight of it all pressing down. Steady. That's what I'd wanted, wasn't it? A quiet life with Tom, no secrets, no chaos. But as I sat there, the Texas sun dipping low, I couldn't shake the ache in my chest, a longing for something I'd tasted and lost. I never reached out to Jake. I kept his letter hidden, a relic of a mistake I wouldn't repeat. Tom and I carried on, not perfect but together, a fragile piece built on what was left. Jake, I heard through a friend, had found work in Dallas, a new start far from here. We'd all paid our price, him with exile, me with a half-healed marriage, Tom with a trust he'd never fully regain. The storm had passed, but the scars remained, a quiet reminder that some lines, once crossed, change everything. And as I stood to go inside, I promised myself I'd never let it happen again, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew I couldn't survive the fallout twice.